Hello, I am Emily. I am 16 and I am the MajorTim.space mentor. And Florence, please introduce yourself.
I'm MajorTim.space 2022 to 2023 7 to 9 Young Ambassador. I'm Florence Dowrick.
And today we are here with Christina Korp. Could you please introduce yourself, Christina?
Sure. I'm Christina Korp. I am not going to tell you my age because I'm old. But I am known as the astronaut wrangler, and I managed Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin for 10 years and ran his education foundation. But now I have my own foundation called Space for a Better World, where we're connecting the space curious to the space serious. And I work with 6 astronauts now, and 5 of them are women.
Okay. My first question for you is that kind of, how did you go from creating music to being a astronaut, manager for the astronaut Buzz Aldrin?
Yeah, so it was kind of an accident, and I have a very non-traditional way that I got into space. So when I was 12 years old, I started singing professionally, and I was in a family band with my brother on drums and me on keyboards, my dad on lead guitar and my sister on bass, and we had a family band. And so my whole life was about music. And after 10 years of being in the band, I went to Los Angeles to become a rock star. And I had more success than many people. I did get signed to Warner Brothers. I made a couple of records, and I even sang background vocals on Ringo Starr. Do you guys know who Ringo Starr is from the Beatles? So I got to work with the Beatle, and then eventually started doing production for an American celebrity running his record label, production company, radio show. I produced concert specials for PBS, that sort of thing. That was my life before. My whole life was music. And then I really wanted to have a break because I had been working since I was 12 years old, which is not normal. And so I decided to just go in a different direction. And I answered an ad in the Hollywood Reporter magazine to work for Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11 astronaut. And so a lot of people are just like, what? And, you know, they hired me because of my entertainment experience. I knew how to book concert tours and appearances and media and PR. And he gave appearances, and, you know, he's a famous man and he did lots of interviews. So they really needed somebody like me. But I didn't know anything really about space when I got this job. And to be honest, in a way, I think it was a good thing because it made me curious to learn. I didn't know until I met Buzz that there was more than Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin who walked on the moon. And I think I'm like the average person who doesn't work in space, who thinks those are the only two who went to the moon. And very quickly, I became friends with most of the Apollo astronauts and learned that there were 12 men who walked on the moon, that we landed on the moon 6 times, that 24 men went and orbited the moon from 1968 to 1972. And so I have been very privileged to have been welcomed into the world of the Apollo astronauts. And then in the course of that, I also started meeting all the female pioneers of space, the first woman to work in mission control, the first woman to work at Kennedy Space Center, the first American woman to go to space, Sally Ride. I got to meet all of these women. And that, I tell you this because then that has led me to like what I do now, which is I promote a lot of women and girls issues and try to highlight these women in space to give them the recognition that a lot of the guys get.
Okay. I am one of 4 siblings personally, and I think I have a big family. But you had 9 siblings. How did you manage
that? Well, I didn't have any control over it. So I'm number 4. So I'm the 4th kid of 10 children, as you mentioned, and I have 5 brothers and 4 sisters. I unfortunately lost one of my brothers a couple of years ago. He died in a bicycle accident. So, but I still say that I have 5 brothers and 4 sisters. I will tell you, it is an interesting thing to grow up as one of 10 children. Where are you in the four? Are you in the middle? Are you the oldest, the youngest?
I'm second oldest, so
So
I'm
you're
there.
in the middle. Yeah, the middle children. It's always interesting to be a middle child because it's a different have the attention of how the oldest gets attention and the youngest gets a different kind of attention, and then the ones in the middle kind of often are a bit more independent because you learn how to do things yourself in a way that the oldest and the youngest sometimes doesn't get to do. But I'm happy that I was a middle child because I think it taught me how to be very independent. I learned how to make my own like snacks after school. I had to learn how to do a lot of things by myself because my mom was pretty busy with the whoever was the baby at the time.
Mm.
So I think it's not a bad thing to be a middle child. You can become very independent and learn a lot of things. Learn from your older sibling, right, and your parents, and then you can teach your younger siblings how to do things too.
Has having kind of quite a large family, has that helped you in your career in any way? Like you said, like developing the qualities of being more independent as a middle sibling.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I think of the 10 children, I'm probably considered by far the most successful one. And
Mm.
and that doesn't mean like I'm not rich, I don't make a ton of money. I make more money than the others do, but I'm just very ambitious and I'm trying to do a lot of things. And I have this desire and this curiosity to try a lot of things that are risky to some people. And, I every time I produce like a big gala with, all these astronauts, or I produced events or done zero gravity flights, people think I'm crazy. I know it, but but then I pull it off, and I always think, what's next? And I think that's partially because when I was a kid, I already had this desire to do big things. And, a lot of people, I remember being 8 years old and saying to everyone, I'm going to travel the world. And I grew up in a pretty poor family. And people would say to me, oh, keep dreaming, little girl. It's good to dream. And so I can't say that I got a ton of encouragement, but at the same time, I think that in a way, because I was a middle child and I did develop this independence, it did help me to I don't know, to learn how to be resourceful, to do things without a lot of resources, without a lot of help. So sometimes I think when it's maybe a little harder, it's not a bad thing. It teaches you how to figure out something that you didn't know how to do before, or try to find another way. That's something that I think I share with astronauts, by the way, is this like, if this doesn't work, find another way to make something work, or just try a different way of thinking. And so I do think that being one of 10 kids and not always getting, everything I wanted is not a bad thing. It taught me how to try to learn how to get the things that I want, or to work towards the things that I want.
What made you decide to leave music behind and like go for space? Okay, like how did you find out about the space when you were writing all your songs and you were into that?
Well, I think like many kids, I always loved the moon and the stars. I think everybody can relate to that, right? You go outside and you see the planets, and I'm still one of those people when I go outside that says, look at the moon, when it's really bright, or it's on the horizon, or it looks really big. And so I think that's something every kid, every person on Earth can relate to. But I have to say, though, I will say my grandmother on my dad's side, my grandmother Marianne, she loved astronomy. And so she always had astronomy magazine, and she was always talking about what was going on with the planets. And I have to say, I didn't really notice it as much when I was a kid. I remember it more now as an adult, how important that was to her. And as I got older, for Christmas presents, I would get her a subscription to the magazine. That's what I would get her, is astronomy magazine, so she could get it all year long. So I have to say, like, going from music to space, yeah, this was not the plan for my life. I really took the job to work for Buzz I thought it was going to be boring. I thought it was going to just be a nice, boring break to do a simple administrative job for an old guy who walked on the moon. And so, it wasn't what I expected it to be at all when I started it, which was a good thing. I began to see really quickly, wow, there's a lot of amazing things going on in space that I didn't know about. And maybe I can explore that. And maybe I can use my skills as an entertainment person to try to highlight those things in a way that I think a lot of space people aren't that good at. and this is why now I'm very passionate about trying to get a lot more people like me and a lot more creative thinkers like me into, because, sometimes I do feel like some space people, the technical people, engineers and scientists and stuff, are so focused on what they're doing, they don't realize how powerful the image, like this background we have with, the stuff we learned from the James Webb Space Telescope is amazing. It's gorgeous. And it may be a technical thing where, this amazing satellite with the most powerful camera ever is 1 million miles in orbit around the sun. And it's a technical thing, but what it's bringing back is this beautiful artwork of the universe. And I think that that's something that attracts a lot more people from very, very different backgrounds. And we need more people from many backgrounds to work in space. So I tell you this, a roundabout answer, because, if you think about music, there are many songs about the planets and Earth and the stars. And I think that space is intertwined in everything that we do. We wear fashion that has spacey things, rockets and things like that, right? And in our music and in our art. So to me, even though it seems probably to a lot of people that I came from this music world and I fell into space, like they don't go together. But what I've learned is a lot of the astronauts and the people I know who work at NASA and work at the aerospace companies, most of them are also artists and musicians and very creative and like to do, woodwork or carve things or whatever, do quilts. That's what I think is surprising to some people, is how much art and music and those things are intertwined in space too. And that's what I want to try to remind people more of. You can use both sides of your brain, the creative side that loves music and art, and also the technical side, which is what STEM is mostly focused on, the technical side. But you can do both. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can bring all those talents together.
This is a question that I was wondering that was also kind of similar. It was a bit different, but also kind of the same. It was basically how pursuing like creative things and pursuing artistic things can help improve the development of like space technologies and stuff like that. And yeah, I
think so. One thing that I think is really, really powerful about pursuing or using arts and when you're thinking about space is it's kind of the dreamers. It's kind of the artists who dream up things we've never done before, right? Like if you think about that and you think about a lot of the movies and the TV shows and different things like that, they're showing things that we've never done before. And I think that that's what happened too, like with the Apollo missions. Like Buzz used to say to me, when we were a kid, there were no rockets. When he was a kid, there was no such thing, And so, but they dreamed about it. There were books about it. There were stories about it, about going to space on spaceships. And even as a little kid, there were comic books that he read. And so he always looked at those as like science projection, science prediction. And so that's where I think, reminding people that the creative thinking and what it helps us to think up that of things we've never done before. And then what happens is the people like the engineers and the scientists, they're the ones who try to help figure out how do we make those impossible things or those things we've never done before happen? And so that's why I'm really, really passionate about using art to feed that creative, innovative thinking, because it's not, frankly, it's not that hard to just keep learning how to do something we already know how to do. You can memorize it, right? You can take something technical and you can try to memorize it, and then you can learn how to do it. But if you try to figure out or dream up something that's never been done before, that feeds this whole thing of, okay, how could we solve that? We could try a lot of different things and lots of experiments. And so that's where I think the value of creative thinking, innovative thinking, getting people to dream of things that we haven't done before is really, really powerful. And then it's also a very powerful way of problem solving, because if you only do things the way you know how to do it, and then what if you get stuck and something breaks? You have to think outside the box about what the heck, like for a solution. So I'll tell you a really quick little story that you probably don't know and a lot of people don't. So Buzz Aldrin has a doctorate from MIT in astronautics. So meaning his expertise is using creating a trajectory that's very technical with math to try to intercept spacecraft to rendezvous so they can dock in space. And so that's partially why he was chosen to go on that first mission to land on the moon. And so all these years of planning, all this training, all this technical stuff that they built was very successful. They landed on the moon successfully. But when they came back in from being on the surface of the moon, they had to throw out all their trash on the surface of the moon. And then the checklist that they had told them to sleep. And so Buzz took dibs on the floor. There were no chairs in the spacecraft when they landed on the moon. They were standing when they landed on the moon. And then Neil Armstrong just leaned against a console. And when Buzz laid on the floor, he said he saw this little black piece of plastic out of the corner of his eye. And he looked and he said, that looks like a circuit breaker. And so he looked up at the rows and rows of circuit breakers on the wall of the spacecraft and saw one was broken off. And it was the one that said engine arm. It was the one to light the engine to lift off the moon to come home. And it was broken. So they called Mission Control and said, hey, we've got a problem. We broke off this circuit breaker. How do we trigger the circuit? And they said, oh, well, why don't you guys go to sleep and we'll see if we can reroute the power somehow to another circuit so that you can, light the engine to lift off. And so they said, Buzz would always say, can you imagine 2 guys on the moon and you don't know if you're going to come home? And they tell you to go to sleep. Well, they laid down, they went to sleep, and 6 hours later they called back Mission Control, and Mission Control said, we've got nothing. You're going to have to push something in there. And so Buzz would always joke, I wasn't going to put my pinky finger in there. There was electricity in there. I wasn't going to put a metal pen because electricity, it would have shocked me. But he had a felt tip pen that he liked to write with because he said it wrote better in space. And so he used that. It was just a plastic pen. So I'd say this because, and he would always say, this out of the box thinking, this simple thing of just thinking of using a plastic pen to push in the circuit in order to activate the electricity so they could light the engine to leave the moon. To him, that was creative thinking outside the box. All of these years of training, all of this hardware, all of this technical stuff they built, and something so simple as thinking of something, a creative solution is what saved them to come back. So I tell you this because even someone as technical as Buzz Aldrin was always really passionate about creative thinking, about promoting creative and innovative thinking. I know that was a long story. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. An astronaut wrangler is a very exciting title. It makes it seem as if astronauts are hard to manage.
Well,
is that what you kind of had?
Well, so I will tell you, so all the years that I worked with Buzz, people would call me up and say, since you're the astronaut wrangler, they would say, since you're the astronaut whisperer, could you tell us blah, blah, blah? And I would say, no, it's not whispering. That's not the word. I'm sure, as you can imagine, astronauts are very strong personalities. And so sometimes you have to try to get them like to do the things that they have agreed to do. But it's kind of a joke, really. And some of my friends, I will tell you, did not like it when I started calling myself the astronaut wrangler because they thought it was disrespectful. But the astronauts think it's funny. And actually, a couple of astronauts have said, "Oh, we're like wrangling cats." So that's accurate, what you call yourself. And so it's kind of a joke, but it's like an inside joke. And the reason I kept it is because the astronauts are all very good natured about it, and they have a good sense of humor about it. So, and I'm the only one in the whole world who has that title, so I think it's worth it.
It's a very unique brand to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of like how do you think that the world will change after the Artemis mission has happened, like, and like kind of what effect will it have on maybe like the way people think and see space, and like the way how accessible they see it as like a pursuable future and career that they could possibly have, like, yeah.
I am so excited about Artemis. So do you understand what's going to happen with Artemis? Can you guys tell me that?
I think they're going to have a base on the moon, aren't they? I don't know exactly. Aren't they staying there for a while?
So yes, that's one part of it. The Artemis missions are to start building a long-term sustainable presence on the moon, with humans on the moon, in an international capacity too, not just a bunch of white American guys, which is what happened before. But what's more exciting to me about Artemis is that the first women will go to the moon. And I think that's a pretty big deal. That's something that, for me, the day that happens, I mean, I got to go to the Artemis 1 launch, which was just the rocket and the spacecraft going in November. And I was very emotional about it. And I took my daughter, who is 11 years old, my daughter Brielle, and I hope she remembers that forever. It was very emotional to see that rocket lift off. But just think when humans are on the rocket that goes on the next Artemis mission. That is super exciting. So, I think that the inspiration that people will feel from seeing women being included in those missions to go to the moon, women, and also an international crew, because the idea, I think, on the first mission to orbit the moon with Artemis 2 will be 2 men and 2 women probably. But it won't just be Americans. It'll be Europeans. It'll be maybe people from Asia, which is very exciting. And so, besides the fact that the program we have to build big rockets, we have to build habitats and life support systems and electrical systems and farming systems to be able to survive on the moon, right? So this is going to spur on a lot of innovation and a lot of possibilities for cool careers in many, many different areas to be able to survive on the moon. So that's one thing. But I also think I feel very strongly that just the idea, though, of people seeing, and young girls seeing women go to the moon is just be so exciting. And I hope will excite more women and girls to see that there is place for them to work in space. The thing I'm really trying to drive home too, because a lot of people think you have to be a genius to work at NASA or to work at the European Space Agency. Guess what, guys? You don't. I know most of these people, and I'm telling you, yes, they're smart people. But my point is that a lot of times I think people are intimidated. Like, you have to have these perfect grades. And don't get me wrong, you should get the best grades you can get. But I know a lot of people who work at NASA who were C students who decided to work hard to get their grades up because they wanted to work there and they wanted to find a way to get there. And so the thing that, I think that seeing women will be exciting, not just for women, but seeing a much more diverse group of people go to the moon will inspire a lot of people. And I think that inspiration is key in order to get people to see the possibilities of these careers that, are in space. And then the last thing I would like to say about this particular thing is that to get people, and especially young people, thinking is that as we build this presence of Artemis on the moon, this permanent presence, you got to think about if we're going to live on the moon, if we're going to have people living on and working on the moon, we're going to need every job that you currently do on Earth, we're going to need on the moon.
Mm.
We're going to need trash, people. We're going to need nurses. We're going to need, people who know how to repair, technicians. There's going to be a need for all kinds of different kinds of jobs. So thinking about space in a way that is every job you need on Earth, you're going to need in space too. Mm. And that expands opportunities for lots of different types of people if you think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. You managed Buzz Aldrin for 10 years. What was he like personality-wise? And how does working with him compare to Charlie Duke or Nicole Stott?
Oh, they're very different personalities, I'll tell you that. So when I first met Buzz, I don't get intimidated very often by anybody, but I wasn't intimidated, but I definitely felt like, wow, this person is an icon. Like he's going to be in the history books for hundreds of years, But what I was really pleased to learn very quickly was he's a very sweet man. In many technical circles, he's kind of a bull in a china shop, meaning that he sometimes, because he's so smart and because he knows so much, that sometimes he could rub people the wrong way because he'll come in and tell people what they should be doing. And sometimes people don't like that. But on a personal basis, he and I were very good friends, and he had really good sense of humor about himself and very, very down to earth. I liked traveling with Buzz a lot because he was very curious. And sometimes he would stop and talk to people if he saw that they had a certain bracelet on that looked interesting, or if they had a watch and he thought it was interesting, he would stop and talk to them. One of my favorite stories too is one time we were in Arkansas in America, in a very rural small town in an airport. And we were sitting at the gate getting ready to board the plane, and I had to use the restroom. So I went and I came back, and Buzz was talking to this young girl who had dreadlocks and piercing. Her nose was pierced, and she had, she looked very funky. And he said, she has hula hoops. And he was so curious because she had these hula hoops she was going to be bringing on the plane. And so she didn't know who he was. And after we got on the plane, she was the last person, how they call the groups on the planes.
Yeah.
We were group 1, and he went in the cockpit, and then she was like group 9, like the final group. She was like the last person to get on the plane. And so when she got on the plane, I said to her, hey, do you mind if I tweet a photo of you and Buzz? And she said, no, that's okay. I'm not on Twitter. And I said, do you realize who he is? And she said, he said his name was Buzz. And I said, yes, Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon. And she couldn't believe it. She said a swear word. and then everybody began to cheer on the plane. And these guys that were on the plane sitting around me in first class were saying, we would have loved to have had a conversation with him the way that you did. And, so to me, what I loved was that he was so curious about her having hula hoops that, you know what I mean? He wasn't snobby. He's never been like that, So it's interesting when you meet somebody who's so famous, but when it comes down to it, they're people. They're just normal people. Now, I will tell you that Charlie Duke, the 10th man to walk on the moon on Apollo 16, he is so sweet. He's the sweetest guy of the Apollo astronauts. Some of them can be gruff. Some of them, they're fighter pilots. They can be, like you would expect, like a macho man fighter pilot. But Charlie's actually quite a sweet man and has a very sweet nature. And he was always really, really lovely to Buzz. So it's partially why I worked so closely with Charlie and I consider him a really good friend. He's just a really, really nice man. And he's very humble. He's walked down the moon. He's a general in the Air Force. So then you go to the women. And Nicole Stott, I do kind of unabashedly say now she's my favorite astronaut. She's a wonderful person. She's not just, a NASA astronaut, she's a genuinely good human being who really cares about people. And that really, really, to me, we learned very quickly that we both love to use art to inspire. And so now we call each other partners in purpose. We travel together a lot. And, we work together. I get her speaking engagements, and we work together on marketing and branding campaigns. But we also do a lot of outreach together, space art projects with kids. And we travel to different places to try to inspire people about space. So I hope you guys get to meet her. She's wonderful.
I think this is something that you kind of brought up before, but something I want to ask more questions about. A while ago, I saw something very small about like one very small part of a filter was produced from wool made in New Zealand for one of the spacesuits in the Artemis mission. And I was wondering how kind of countries all around the world, if you have any examples, how every countries all around the world have contributed to the Artemis mission.
Well, I have to say I'm not an expert on this.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But I know that a lot of different, countries have different expertise or different things that they're working on. I'm sure it's similar to like the Apollo days. So like, for instance, in Apollo, I know there were some, I believe in Switzerland, they had this reflector, like this solar reflector experiment that was there, and it's still on the surface of the moon. And so I think that that's the cool thing about this kind of endeavor, and probably is going to be more widespread with Artemis, is how many nations are going to contribute certain kind of areas of expertise that they have. I've learned recently about this really cool thing in Oxford that I'm going to be going to see firsthand, and about how this one company is creating solar arrays and a solar, like a solar panel, but like a foldable one that's very flexible. They're working with origami artists. You know what origami is? Yeah. Like fold paper and stuff. So they're working, and this is a perfect example to me of like where you're using art and innovative thinking for something technical like a solar array. They have an origami artist who's teaching them how to fold things so that they can be more efficient. So like when they get to space, then they can unfold and be as big as they need to be, but be flexible, that sort of thing. So I think for Artemis, there's going to be a lot of stuff like that with a lot of different countries who have different ideas and different kind of experiments that they're going to put, or their different expertise. Like for instance, Canada is very well known for their Canada arm. The Canada arm is this big, long robotic arm that was on the space shuttle. And it was something that only Canada had perfected. And it was a big, long robotic arm that could grab big things, and someone would operate it remotely, I think, and then it would take something from here to there. So, I think that we're best when we actually have lots of countries bring their different ideas and their different experiments. It's better than just having one country do only what they know how to do. I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't invite everybody to bring their different skills and expertise. So I'm not sure about what the New Zealand company is doing, but I'm not surprised that there are probably lots of different companies in different countries who are going to contribute something, because even during the Apollo days, it was many, many different companies, who made different pieces of the lunar landers. Somebody made the foot, somebody made the leg, somebody made the electrical connection. So it's never just one person and one company. It's many, many people coming together, to create something.
My next question is more than just like outreach, what can be done to encourage like women and people of different backgrounds, maybe people that don't have as many opportunities to pursue higher education, to make a career in STEM more accessible to them?
Well, I think, like I've been saying, I really think you have to inspire people. I have 2 kids. I have a daughter named Brielle, who's 11, and a son named Logan, who is 8. And Logan is actually really likes math, and Brielle hates it. And I hated math too. I have to tell you, when I was a kid, I hated math, and I was really good at it too, by the way, but I did not like it. And I'm grateful now that I had this natural ability to do math well, but I really wanted to do creative things. Now, that being said, I think it helps me out now that I was good at math, because it helps me do the other things that I want to do. But what I have learned from my experience of meeting thousands of people who like worked on the Apollo mission or were inspired by Apollo is that the inspiration of what they saw made them want to become a teacher or a doctor or an engineer or a scientist or whatever. And so I'm passionate about saying, like, everyone promotes education, and don't get me wrong, education is key. However, I think you need to inspire people. Like, we push so much education and information, but we cannot forget the inspiration. To me, the inspiration is what makes people want to be educated, makes them want to learn about the information, makes them want to be a part of something. And so wherever I can, whenever I can, I'm always trying to show inspiring things through space and remind people of the stories, because I think that that's what will get people to believe it's possible. That's partially why, if you've seen some of the stuff that I do, I highlight Black astronauts, Black female astronauts, because I think it's important for young Black girls, especially, to see that it's possible, that for someone who looks like them to get to this most incredible, role of an astronaut. And I think that helps light that spark of possibility in them. So whenever I can, I like to show people rocket launches, people going to space, people floating in space, or get them to dream about what space, means to them when they think about it. So to me, the key is using art and inspiration to try to attract more people, because I think if you just try to show them a bunch of math problems, I don't think that's going to do it. There may be some people who look at a math problem and they're like, ooh, I love it, I want to solve it. But I don't think, how do you girls feel? Do you look at a math problem and think, wow, I love it, let's do it? Maybe you do, I don't know.
No, not really.
It depends, I guess.
But if you see something amazing, like, for instance, Nicole said when she saw airplanes, her father worked on airplanes, it made her want to learn how does it fly? Seeing something fly, how does it fly? And then that's what made her learn, start delving into what are the aerodynamics, what is the engineering that enables this amazing thing of flying. And I think that that's what needs to happen, is you get to see something cool and then you want to figure out how it works, right? And then that leads you into wanting to learn the STEM things.
I have a question. Disney's Toy Story Buzz Lightyear, does that have any connection to Buzz Aldrin?
Yes, it does. There used to be a video on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's there anymore, but John Lasseter, who was the creator of Toy Story, he had put up a video saying how when he first came up with the Toy Story characters, originally Buzz Lightyear was called Lunar Larry. Lunar Larry. That's so exciting, isn't it? So he said he felt that way too. He had named the character Lunar Larry, and then he was like, it's not quite there. It's not quite good. So he started thinking about the Apollo astronauts, and then he said Buzz was just the coolest name ever for an astronaut, for a space explorer. So that's how he became Buzz Lightyear. And Buzz never got anything from it. He was not paid for the use of anything like that, but it was meant to honor him. And so there were times where Buzz, you can find this, there's a video somewhere online of Buzz training Buzz Lightyear doll to go to the space station. They sent a Buzz Lightyear doll to the space station for a while. And Buzz, I was there when I got to, when they filmed Buzz training the Buzz Lightyear doll to go to space.
Buzz Aldrin appeared on Dancing with the Stars. It must have been very different from what he was used to at NASA. What inspired him to take part in the show?
So I had been working with Buzz for about 2 years at that point when Dancing with the Stars called him. And I think in the UK you call it Strictly Come Dancing or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's the same show basically. But I have to tell you a funny story. And I only learned this when we started doing this book called No Dream is Too High, which was several years later, which was that I got the call that Dancing with the Stars wanted Buzz to come on the show. And whenever I could, I tried to get him to do things like that because I thought this is a great way to reach a different audience than the typical space audience, you know. And so I called him and he was at the White House and he was in a meeting at the White House. And I said, but I didn't know that's where he was. And I said, hey, Dancing with the Stars wants you to have you on the next season. And he goes, okay. I said, okay, well, you have to dance. And he said, okay. And I said, like, every day you have to dance. You have to do ballroom dancing. And he kept saying, okay. And I said, well, it's going to be hard. And he was like, okay, all right, sounds good. So then I went and told him, okay, I guess he wants to do it. I was shocked. I didn't think he'd want to do it. And then before we knew it, he was training to do Dancing with the Stars. And he had so much fun and he got in shape and he liked dancing and he liked being around all the young people, and he really enjoyed it. He wasn't a great dancer, but he enjoyed the experience. But the funny thing is later when we were working on this book, he said, yeah, when you called me at the White House, I was just trying to get you off the phone when he agreed to do Dancing with the Stars. And so the funny thing is maybe if I had realized that, he wouldn't have actually done it. But that's what I like, though, is that he said, okay. And then I said, yeah, he wants to do it. And then he did it. And it was a lot of fun to do that. And the funny thing is after that, when we would go to the airport, people would stop us sometime and say, hey, that's the guy from Dancing with the Stars. They wouldn't remember him as the guy who walked on the moon. They'd say, there's the guy from Dancing with the Stars.
Wow. I guess it's one way to be remembered.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I mean, it got a whole different group of people to pay attention to what he was doing, right? So that was the point. That's why sometimes when we could, we would do things like that to try to get people who maybe aren't paying attention to space to think, there's an old guy who walked on the moon. What is he doing now? What does he care about now? And he was always hoping that would lead them to his vision and for the future of Mars missions. So,
okay.
What other kinds of things that has he done that is like similar to Dancing on the Stars to reach a wider audience?
He did. He was on The Simpsons cartoon before. He played himself on The Simpsons. He was on a show in America called 30 Rock. Like, he did a lot of TV shows playing himself. The Big Bang Theory is a comedy show that was on for a long time. He was on an episode of that. So whenever we had that kind of, we did a making of rap video one time with Snoop Dogg. And whenever we could do that kind of thing, that was why we did it, was so that, and at first I have to tell you, he kind of didn't want to do some of those things because he said, oh, the other astronauts won't like it. And I said, yeah, but you don't need to convince the other astronauts. You need to convince people like me. You need to get people like me to pay attention to what you're doing if you want the broader public to care about space. So.
Okay. I have a question. Okay, so I found out that Buzz Aldrin's actual name is Edward Eugene Aldrin.
Edwin Eugene Aldrin. Yep, he was Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. His father was Senior. So he was, that was his legal name for most of his life. But his sister Fayanne, he was the youngest of 3 kids. He had 2 older sisters, Maddie and Fayanne. So Fayanne was the middle child. When he was born, she tried to call him brother, but she couldn't say brother, so it sounded like buzzer. And so all while he was a little kid, he was Buzzer, and he would sign Christmas cards as a little kid, Buzzer. and then it just evolved into Buzz. So his whole life he was called Buzz. But so that was his nickname. And even when he went to the moon, they would say Edwin, in quotes, Buzz Aldrin. And so in 1985 or 1986, he just was sick of being Edwin. His father died. He didn't want to change his name because it was the same as his father. But after his father passed away, he felt like he could change it. So actually, he legally changed it to Buzz Aldrin in the courts. And when he did it, and he was in front of the judge in America, like sometimes I guess you have to go and when you're doing it legally, and he had to go to court. And when he was doing it, the judge said, "Why should I allow you to change your name to a famous person's name, Buzz Aldrin?" And then when the judge looked up from the paper and saw Buzz, he said, "Oh, you are Buzz Aldrin." And so since like the mid 80s, Buzz's legal name is Buzz Aldrin. And I have to tell you, in all the travels that we did for so many years, I would tell people his legal name is Buzz Aldrin. And then they would go and make his plane ticket in Edwin Eugene Aldrin. And I'd say, no, his legal name is Buzz Aldrin. Mm. So anyway, and some people still don't know that that's his legal name. Mm. But now you guys know.
Now we know.
We know.
I don't have any more questions for today.
I think I have one or two more, so I'll go ahead with the next one.
Thank you.
You have organized a lot of things in the past. Are you working on any more projects?
I am. I never stop. I am working on 2 zero-gravity flights this year. I'm going to do one in Houston in June, and I'm going to have 2 astronauts on that flight. I'll have Nicole Stott, who we've talked about, and Doug Hurley, who was on the first crewed mission on SpaceX to the space station. Bob and Doug, they were the famous astronauts who went on that mission. So Doug Hurley and Nicole Stott. And I do these zero-gravity flights as fundraisers for my foundation, Space for a Better World. And that helps me with the outreach that I do, the space art projects and the kind of storytelling and messaging that I do with Nicole. And then the second zero-gravity flight we're going to do is in September, and that will be in France. This is my first time ever doing it in France, which is really exciting. And then I am working on some events in Romania. In June also. We'll be doing like a public outreach day, a space summit, and a gala. And then in the summertime, Nicole and I may be going to do some space camp like we did in the Maldives last year. We might be doing space camp in Thailand and Bali. And so it's my favorite thing to go traveling the world and to go to new places and meet new people. And this time I'm trying to bring my kids along with us though, because it's it's going to some new, interesting, exotic places. So yeah, lots going on, girls.
Okay, I've got one. My female STEM inspiration is probably Poppy Northcutt. And I was lucky enough to have an interview with her a couple of weeks ago. And I was just wondering what your inspiration is.
It's hard. I have a lot of them, so I could name a bunch of the women who I call my space sisters, #space sisters, because I really, really love a lot of these female astronauts that I've come to know, like Nicole. I mean, she really inspires me, and there are many other women. Susan Kilrain, the second woman to pilot the space shuttle, youngest person to pilot the space shuttle. Cyan Proctor, who I do a lot with. She's, I'm inspired by all of these women. I will say Poppy Northcutt is up there, though. She is wonderful. She's such a wonderful person, and I really love her dearly. And then there's another woman who's that other pioneer that I told you about who I really love. Is her name is Joanne Morgan. So Joanne Morgan, you guys can look her up if you don't know who she is, was the only woman who was in the launch control when Apollo 11 lifted off to go to the moon. And so she was the only woman who worked in launch control at Kennedy Space Center for 10 years. Could you imagine being the only girl, the only woman? Mm-hmm. So she's quite an inspiration to me, her story. And she she in a way she's not as well known as Poppy, because Poppy did a lot of press when she was working in mission control, because she understood that if other women saw her, that she might actually inspire more women and girls. And Joanne knew that that was probably the case too, but she had worked so hard to fit in with the guys. She was worried that if she tried to seem like she was special by doing interviews, that the guys might treat her differently. She told me that in 1972, she finally did an interview, and then she got thousands of letters in the mail from young girls and saying, I didn't know that girls could be an engineer. And then she said she realized she made a mistake and she should have done more interviews, because she didn't realize what an impact it was going to be for girls to see someone like her working at Kennedy Space Center. So anyway, then she's devoted the whole rest of her life now to trying to inspire more women and girls to go into engineering. And so she's wonderful, but she's getting older now. She's in her 80s, but she lives in Montana, and she's really wonderful. We gave her an award at one of the galas that I produced. And so if you get a chance, go look her up. She's a great lady, Joanne Morgan.
Okay, I don't think I have any more questions now. I think that's the end of the line.
I think maybe to finish off, can I ask if you would have any advice for young people who could be interested in STEM, and for like how they might pursue that career?
Well, so first of all, I want to tell people to try to do lots of different things. I think most people will tell you, work hard on your grades, work hard at school. And yes, you should do that. But I also think what's really valuable is to try to do a lot of different things. What I mean is play instruments. Like Joanne Morgan said that her father required each of the kids to learn an instrument because he felt it was the best way to get your brain to think about multitasking, reading music and playing like piano, or playing, playing an instrument. You're using lots of motor skills. And even John Glenn, when they asked astronaut John Glenn, the first American man to orbit the Earth, they asked him, what made you the best astronaut and the best pilot? He said, playing the piano, because it was the best way he could teach him how to learn how to do these things with hand, eye, and hand sight type stuff. So I tell you this because I think there's a story about Einstein too, telling his son, learn how to play the piano. It's one of the best things to stimulate your brain, and it's very, very tied to math and rhythm and timing and all of these kinds of things. So that's a valuable one. But again, try lots of things. I think that when you learn how to do something that you really love to do, then you will find your way into something. And if you love space, then you'll find a way to do what you are good at or what you like to do in space. There's no one size fits all. There's so many different types of people, and we need everybody with lots of different ways of thinking. So I tell you, try lots of things. If you love space, try to learn how to do a lot of things, because all of those skills will be valuable when you get to the point of wanting to try to have a career.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being here with us today and making time for us today.
I appreciate you ladies wanting to talk to me. It's very, very, it's a big honor for me whenever I can talk to young people, and hopefully if anything that I says helps inspire you, then that's a successful conversation. I want to take a picture of our little panel here. I'm just going to take a screenshot. Okay.
Okay.
It was lovely talking to you.
Me too.
It was really good talking to you.
I'm very late for my Zoom too, and it's okay. I don't care. I have a friend who's on it. She's handling it for me right now.